A widowed father, abandoned by his own blood when he needed them most, paid just $1,200 for a frozen manor no one wanted. But what he found sealed in the basement would make his family beg to return and silence everyone who ever doubted him. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning Marcus Webb buried his wife, not a single member of his family stood beside him. The cemetery in Holbrook, Vermont sat quiet beneath a pale winter sky, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. Marcus held his daughter's hand so tight he worried he might hurt her, but he couldn't let go. She was all he had left. Lily was 7 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark curls and her father's stubborn jaw. She didn't cry during the service. She just stared at the casket like she was waiting for it to open, waiting for her mama to sit up and say it was all some terrible mistake. Marcus wished he could tell her it was, but Anna wasn't coming back. The cancer had taken her slowly, piece by piece, over 14 months of hospital rooms and insurance fights and sleepless nights spent praying to a God who didn't seem to be listening. And now she was gone, and Marcus was 38 years old, broken, and completely alone. He remembered the phone calls he'd made in those final weeks. Desperate calls, humble calls. Calls to his older brother Vincent, asking if maybe he could help with the medical bills, just until Marcus got back on his feet. Vincent had laughed, actually laughed. "You should have planned better," he said. "Anna was sick for over a year. What were you doing that whole time?" Marcus had hung up without answering. He called his other brother Dean next. Dean didn't even pick up, just sent a text 3 days later that said, "Sorry man, things are tight over here too. Good luck." And his father Walter, the man who raised him, who taught him how to swing a hammer and read a level and build something with his own 2 hands. Walter hadn't spoken to Marcus since Anna's diagnosis. Said he didn't want to be around all that sadness. Said it brought back too many memories of Marcus's mother, who'd passed from the same disease 15 years earlier. As if that was an excuse, as if grief was contagious and Marcus was the carrier. So when the funeral ended and the last handful of dirt hit the casket and the pastor offered his hollow condolences, Marcus walked away from the cemetery holding Lily's hand, and he didn't look back. He didn't have anyone to look back for. They drove home in silence, the old Ford pickup rattling over frozen roads, heat barely working, Lily's breath fogging the window as she traced shapes in the condensation. Home was a 2-room apartment above Dell's laundromat on Main Street, the kind of place where the floors creaked and the pipes groaned and the smell of detergent seeped through the vents no matter how many candles you lit. Marcus had moved them there 6 months ago when he couldn't afford the mortgage on the house anymore. The house where Anna had planted tomatoes every spring, the house where Lily had taken her first steps. He'd sold it for less than it was worth, just to make a dent in the medical debt, and it still wasn't enough. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep clutching the stuffed rabbit Anna had given her on her 5th birthday, Marcus sat at the kitchen table and stared at the stack of bills in front of him. Electricity, water, the hospital, the pharmacy, the ambulance company, the funeral home. Each envelope a reminder of everything he'd lost and everything he still owed. He poured himself a glass of whiskey. Anna would have scolded him for drinking alone, and let the silence swallow him whole. He wasn't sure how long he sat there. Time didn't mean much anymore. But at some point, his eyes drifted to the local newspaper someone had left on the counter. The Holbrook Gazette, 4 pages of nothing, mostly obituaries and church announcements. But on the back page, a small ad caught his attention. County auction, abandoned properties, Hartwell Manor, 40 acres, starting bid, $1,200. He blinked, read it again. Hartwell Manor. Even folks who'd only lived in Holbrook a few years knew that name. The place sat about 8 miles outside of town, deep in the woods at the end of a road that hadn't been paved since the 70s. People said it was haunted. Said the man who built it, Edmund Hartwell, had been some kind of recluse millionaire who vanished without a trace back in 1978. The estate had been tied up in legal limbo ever since. No heirs, no will filed with the county, just decades of silence and snow and slow decay. Marcus had driven past the front gate once, years ago, when he and Anna were first dating. She'd wanted to explore it. He'd told her it was too dangerous, that the roof had probably caved in by now. She'd pouted for an hour, then kissed him and said, "One day, Marcus Webb, you're going to learn that the best things in life are a little bit dangerous." He stared at the ad for a long time. $1,200. He had $1,143 in his savings account, what was left after the funeral deposit. It wasn't enough, but something about that number, that place, wouldn't let him go. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the grief. Maybe it was Anna's voice in his head, teasing him, daring him. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something that felt almost like fate. The next morning, Marcus dropped Lily off at school and drove to the county clerk's office. The auction was scheduled for that Friday, just 3 days away. He asked the clerk, a tired woman named Ruth who'd worked there since the Reagan administration, if anyone else had expressed interest in Hartwell Manor. She looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Honey," she said, "that place has been on the books for almost 50 years. Nobody wants it. Nobody's ever wanted it. You'd be the first person to even ask about it since I started working here." Marcus nodded slowly. "What's the condition?" Ruth shrugged. "Couldn't tell you. County hasn't sent anyone out there in decades. Too far, too cold, too much paperwork. All I know is the structure's still standing. Power and water got shut off in 79. Everything else is a mystery." A mystery. Marcus had never been the type to chase mysteries. He was a carpenter, a builder, a man who liked things solid and measurable and real. But something about this felt different, felt necessary. He thanked Ruth and walked out into the cold Vermont morning, his breath hanging in the air like a question mark. That night, he sat Lily down at the kitchen table and told her about the house. He didn't call it a manor, didn't want to get her hopes up. Just said there was an old place outside of town, big and empty, and Daddy was thinking about buying it, maybe fixing it up, maybe making it their home. Lily's eyes went wide. "Like a castle?" she asked. Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. "Maybe something like that," he said. "But it's going to need a lot of work. A lot. And it might be cold for a while. And lonely." Lily thought about this for a moment. Then she looked up at him with those dark eyes, so much like Anna's it made his chest ache. "Daddy," she said, "we're already cold, and we're already lonely. At least a castle would be ours." He didn't have an answer for that. Friday morning came faster than Marcus expected. He woke before dawn, dressed in his cleanest flannel shirt, and drove to the courthouse with $1,143 in an envelope and a prayer he didn't quite believe in. The auction room was nearly empty, just Marcus, Ruth the clerk, a lawyer from the county, and 2 other bidders who looked like they'd wandered in by accident. Ruth called the properties one by one. A vacant lot on Miller Street went for $800. An old barn on Route 12 sold for $1,500 to a man who said he wanted to turn it into a wedding venue. Then she got to Hartwell Manor. 40 acres, Ruth read from her clipboard. Primary structure approximately 12,000 square feet. Stone foundation. Original construction dated 1892. Last occupied 1978. Condition unknown. Starting bid $1,200. Silence. Marcus raised his hand. Ruth looked at him, then at the room. "Do I hear 1,300? Nothing. 1,250? Still nothing. Ruth sighed, made a note on her clipboard, and nodded at Marcus. "Sold to Mr. Webb for $1,200. Just like that. No fanfare, no applause, no sign from the universe that he'd just changed his life forever. He signed the papers in a daze, handed over his envelope of cash, and walked out with a deed to a place he'd never set foot in. The drive to Hartwell Manor took almost 40 minutes. The roads got narrower the further he went, asphalt giving way to gravel, gravel giving way to dirt, dirt giving way to something that barely qualified as a path. Trees pressed in on both sides, their bare branches clawing at the grey sky like skeletal fingers. And then, just when Marcus started to wonder if he'd taken a wrong turn, the forest opened up and he saw it. Hartwell Manor rose from the frozen landscape like something out of a Gothic novel. 3 stories of grey stone, tall windows dark and empty, twin chimneys reaching toward the clouds. The roof was intact. He could see that even from the road, but everything else was shrouded in ice. Frost covered the walls like a second skin. Icicles hung from the eaves like teeth. The whole place looked frozen in time, trapped in a winter that had lasted half a century. Marcus pulled his truck up to the front gate, which hung open on rusted hinges, and stepped out into the cold. His boots crunched on frozen ground. His breath came out in thick white clouds. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the house that was somehow now his. "What did I just do?" he whispered to no one. But there was no turning back. He walked up the cracked stone path, past a fountain that had become a solid block of ice, past hedges that had grown wild and tangled and dead, until he reached the front door. Massive oak, iron hardware, a knocker shaped like a lion's head. He tried the handle. Locked. He'd expected that. Ruth had given him a ring of old keys, some original, some copies made by the county over the years, and he started trying them one by one. The 7th key worked. The lock clicked. The door groaned open. The smell hit him first. Not rot, not decay, just age. Dust and cold, and the faint ghost of something floral, like perfume that had faded decades ago. He stepped inside and felt the temperature drop even further, if that was possible. The foyer was massive, all marble floors and high ceilings, and a grand staircase that curved up into shadow. White sheets covered every piece of furniture, draped like shrouds over shapes he couldn't quite identify. Chandeliers hung dark and still overhead, their crystals clouded with frost. Marcus walked slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The place was enormous, far bigger than it had looked from outside. Room after room opened up before him, each one frozen in a moment from 1978. A dining room with a table set for 12, plates and glasses still in place, a thick layer of ice crystals covering everything like a spell had been cast. A library with shelves that stretched to the ceiling, books still in their places, their spines cracked and faded but intact. A sitting room with a piano in the corner, keys yellowed, sheet music still open on the stand. It was beautiful. It was heartbreaking. It was his. He spent hours exploring, room by room, floor by floor. The 2nd story held bedrooms, 8 of them, each with its own fireplace, each untouched since the day Edmund Hartwell had vanished. The 3rd floor was smaller, just an attic space filled with trunks and boxes and old furniture that had been stored away and forgotten. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of a life interrupted, photographs on mantels, clothes still hanging in closets, a half-finished letter on a desk in what must have been the master study, the ink faded to brown, the words too blurry to read. But it was on the main floor, in the east wing, that Marcus found something that made him stop cold. He'd been clearing debris from a collapsed section of ceiling. Water damage, probably from a leak that had gone unfixed for decades, when his boot caught on something solid beneath the rubble. He bent down, brushed away the plaster and dust, and found a bookshelf. Not standing upright, but lying flat against the wall, like it had been pushed over deliberately. And behind it, half hidden by the fallen shelf and the debris, was a door. Not a regular door. This was iron, heavy, industrial. The kind of door you'd see in a bank vault or a military bunker. It was covered in frost, the metal so cold it burned his fingers when he touched it. And it was sealed with 3 massive locks, each one rusted but solid. Marcus's heart began to pound. He'd renovated dozens of old houses in his career. He'd found hidden rooms before, nothing more exciting than old wine cellars or forgotten storage spaces. But this was different. This door wasn't hidden by accident. Someone had deliberately concealed it. Someone had deliberately locked it. And someone had deliberately left it frozen in place for nearly 50 years. He tried the keys Ruth had given him. None of them fit. He tried to pry the locks with his crowbar. They didn't budge. Whatever was behind this door, Edmund Hartwell had wanted it to stay hidden. Marcus stood there for a long time, his breath coming in shallow gasps, his mind racing. He should leave it alone. He should focus on making the house livable, on fixing the leaks and restoring the heat, on creating a home for Lily. Whatever secrets Edmund Hartwell had buried behind this door were none of his business. But even as he thought this, he knew it was a lie. He'd bought this house for $1,200 when no one else wanted it. He'd taken a chance when his whole life was falling apart. And now, standing in front of this frozen iron door, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Curiosity, hope, purpose. He wasn't going to ignore this. He couldn't. That evening, Marcus picked Lily up from his neighbor's house, Martha, a kind widow who'd offered to watch her after school, and drove her out to the manor. He hadn't told her where they were going, just said it was a surprise. When the truck rounded the final bend and the house came into view, Lily pressed her face against the window and gasped. "Daddy," she breathed, "it's a castle. It's a real castle." Marcus smiled, feeling something warm bloom in his chest despite the cold. "You like it?" Lily turned to him, her eyes shining. "Can we live here? Please, Daddy, can we live here?" "That's the plan, sweetheart, but it's going to take time, a lot of time, and work." She was already unbuckling her seatbelt, already reaching for the door handle. "I want to see inside. I want to see everything." They explored together as the winter sun sank toward the horizon. Lily ran from room to room, her laughter echoing off the frozen walls, her imagination turning every dusty corner into an adventure. The dining room became a banquet hall for princesses. The library became a wizard's study. The piano became a magical instrument that could summon fairies if you played the right notes. Marcus watched her, and for the first time since Anna died, he felt something other than grief. He felt possibility. That night, after they'd returned to the apartment and Lily had fallen asleep still talking about turrets and secret passages, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and thought about the door. He didn't have the tools to open those locks, not yet. He'd need to find a locksmith, or maybe a welder. He'd need to be careful, methodical. He'd need to figure out what he was getting into before he got into it. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to walk away from that door. Whatever Edmund Hartwell had hidden behind it, Marcus Webb was going to find out. Not for the money. He didn't even know if there was money. Not for fame or recognition. But because Anna had always told him that the best things in life were a little bit dangerous. And because for the first time in 2 years he had something to look forward to. The following week passed in a blur of activity. Marcus used what little credit he had left to buy basic supplies: space heaters, bottled water, non-perishable food, flashlights, batteries. He borrowed a generator from his former employer, Ray Jenkins, who ran a construction company in town and had always liked Marcus, despite having to let him go during Anna's illness. "You're crazy," Ray said when Marcus told him about the manor. "That place has been sitting there since Nixon was president. There's no telling what shape it's in." Marcus just shrugged. Only one way to find out. He started small, securing the broken windows, patching the holes in the roof, getting the main fireplace in the foyer cleaned and functional so he'd have at least one source of warmth. Lily helped when she wasn't in school, carrying tools and holding flashlights and asking 1,000 questions about everything. She named the house Frost Castle and insisted on giving each room its own title: the throne room, the dragon's den, the starlight ballroom. Marcus let her. It was the happiest he'd seen her in over a year. But every night, after Lily was asleep, Marcus found himself standing in front of that iron door. He'd cleared away the rest of the debris by now, revealing the full frame, 7 feet tall, 4 feet wide, solid steel set into the stone wall. The locks were unlike anything he'd seen before, heavy and intricate, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of serious money and serious secrets. He'd called 3 locksmiths in the area. 2 had refused to come out that far in winter. The third, an old man named Gus, who worked out of a shed behind his house, said he'd take a look if Marcus could wait until the roads cleared. So Marcus waited. And while he waited, he researched. The Holbrook Library had a small local history section, and Marcus spent hours there poring over old newspapers and county records, trying to piece together the story of Edmund Hartwell. What he found was sparse but intriguing. Edmund had been born in 1891, the only son of a railroad magnate who'd made his fortune during the Gilded Age. He'd inherited the family wealth at 23 after both parents died in a boating accident that some whispered wasn't entirely accidental. He'd built the manor in 1892, just after taking control of the estate, and had lived there alone for over 50 years, rarely seen in town, never married, no children. The newspaper articles painted a picture of a man who valued privacy above all else. He'd paid his taxes on time, donated to local charities anonymously, and employed a small staff who were famously tight-lipped about their employer's affairs. Then, in November of 1978, Edmund Hartwell had simply disappeared. No note, no explanation, no forwarding address. His staff arrived one morning to find the house empty. Every door locked, every window latched. The police investigated for months, but found nothing. No body, no crime scene, no evidence of foul play. Edmund Hartwell had simply ceased to exist. The estate had been tied up in probate ever since. With no will and no heirs, the county had eventually claimed the property for back taxes, but no one had ever tried to sell it. Too much paperwork, Ruth had said, too many legal complications. And maybe, Marcus thought, too many ghosts. 3 weeks after he'd bought the manor, the roads finally cleared enough for Gus the locksmith to make the trip. He was a weathered man in his 70s, with hands like leather and eyes that had seen more than they'd ever tell. He took one look at the iron door and let out a low whistle. "Military grade," he said, running his fingers over the locks. "Custom made, too. Whoever installed this didn't want anyone getting through." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Can you open it?" Gus considered the question for a long moment. Then he set down his bag and cracked his knuckles. "Son, I've been picking locks for 53 years. Ain't found one yet that could keep me out. But this is going to take time. And it ain't going to be cheap." Marcus thought of his empty bank account, his maxed-out credit cards, his mounting pile of debt. Then he thought of Lily running through the halls, laughing for the first time since her mother died. "Do it," he said. "Whatever it costs, do it." Gus worked for 6 hours. Marcus watched, handed him tools when asked, kept the fire going in the nearest room so they wouldn't freeze. The old man muttered to himself as he worked, a constant stream of observations and complaints that Marcus found strangely comforting. "This here's a ward lock," Gus said at one point, squinting at the mechanism. "Haven't seen one of these since my grandfather's day. Whoever made this knew what they were doing." The sun was setting when the final lock clicked open. Gus stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold, and gestured toward the door. "She's all yours," he said. "Whatever's in there, I hope it's worth it." Marcus paid him in cash, the last of his emergency fund, money he'd been saving for Lily's school supplies, and walked Gus to his truck. When the old man's taillights disappeared down the frozen road, Marcus stood alone in the gathering darkness, staring at the manor's silhouette against the winter sky. Then he went back inside. Lily was staying with Martha tonight. He'd wanted to be alone for this, whatever this turned out to be. He grabbed his flashlight. his crowbar, a bottle of water. He walked through the frozen halls, past the shrouded furniture and the dark chandeliers, until he reached the east wing. The iron door stood before him, finally unlocked after nearly 50 years. Marcus took a deep breath, then another. His hand was trembling when he reached for the handle. The metal was so cold it burned, but he didn't let go. He pulled, and the door swung open with a groan of hinges that hadn't moved in half a century. Behind it was darkness, complete, absolute darkness that seemed to swallow the beam of his flashlight whole, and stairs, stone steps leading down, down, down into the frozen earth beneath Hartwell Manor. Marcus stood at the threshold, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He thought of Anna, of the way she used to laugh at his caution, the way she'd squeeze his hand and lead him into situations he never would have chosen on his own. He thought of Lily, waiting for him to build her a castle. He thought of Edmund Hartwell, a lonely man who had hidden something in this frozen darkness and then vanished without a trace. Then Marcus Webb took his first step down into the unknown. The cold wrapped around him like a living thing, seeping through his jacket, his gloves, his boots. But he kept going, one step at a time, deeper into the secrets that had waited nearly 50 years to be found. At the bottom of the stairs, his flashlight finally caught something other than stone and shadow. He stopped. He stared. And for a long moment, he forgot how to breathe. Because what he saw in that frozen basement wasn't just valuable. It wasn't just unexpected. It was impossible. Marcus stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, his flashlight trembling in his grip, the beam cutting through decades of darkness to reveal something his mind couldn't process. The basement wasn't a basement at all. It was a vault, massive, cathedral-like, stretching out before him in every direction, the stone walls lined with shelves and alcoves and display cases that gleamed faintly in the light. And everywhere he looked, there was treasure. He took a step forward, then another, his boots echoing on the stone floor. The air down here was different. Cold, yes, colder than upstairs, but also dry and still, preserved somehow, like the inside of a time capsule that had been waiting half a century to be opened. His flashlight swept across the nearest wall and landed on a painting. Not just any painting. Even Marcus, who knew nothing about art, recognized the style. Bold brushstrokes, vivid colors, a portrait of a woman with sad eyes and flowers in her hair. The frame was ornate, gilded, clearly worth a fortune on its own. And next to it hung another painting, and another, and another. He counted 12 on that wall alone before he gave up and moved deeper into the vault. The next section held display cases filled with jewelry, necklaces dripping with diamonds, rings set with stones the size of his thumbnail, bracelets that caught the light and scattered it like frozen fire. Marcus pressed his hand against the glass, half expecting it to be a dream, half expecting to wake up in his cramped apartment above the laundromat with nothing but debt and grief to keep him company. But the glass was real. The cold was real. And so was everything else. He found the gold next. Actual gold bars stacked neatly on reinforced shelves like bricks in a wall. He picked one up, felt its weight in his hands. Heavy, solid, impossible. The bar was stamped with numbers and letters he didn't understand, but he understood enough. This was real gold, pure gold, and there were dozens of bars, maybe hundreds, arranged with the same meticulous care as everything else in this frozen vault. Marcus set the bar down and kept walking, his breath coming faster now, his heart racing. The vault seemed to go on forever, room after room connected by stone archways, each space holding its own category of treasure. One room was filled with rare books and manuscripts, their leather covers cracked with age but preserved by the cold. Another held antique furniture, chairs and tables and cabinets that looked like they belonged in a museum. A third room contained nothing but clocks, dozens of them, grandfather clocks and mantel clocks and pocket watches, all stopped at different times, all silent as tombs. But it was the final room that made Marcus's knees buckle. He had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling when his flashlight revealed what lay beneath the heavy canvas tarps. Cars. Vintage automobiles, at least a dozen of them, arranged in neat rows like sleeping giants. He pulled back the first tarp with shaking hands and found himself staring at a 1936 Duesenberg Model J, its chrome gleaming, its paint unmarked by time. The next tarp revealed a 1954 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing, its distinctive doors still intact, its interior leather still supple despite the decades. He moved down the row in a daze. A 1931 Bugatti Type 41 Royale, a 1963 Ferrari 250 GTO, a 1948 Tucker Torpedo, a 1955 Porsche 550 Spider. Each car was worth millions. He knew that much, even without being an expert. These weren't just vehicles. They were pieces of automotive history, the kind of machines that appeared at auctions once a generation and sold for prices that made headlines around the world. And they were all here, hidden beneath a frozen manor in rural Vermont, preserved in perfect condition by the same cold that had kept everything else intact. Marcus sank down onto the stone floor, his back against the wheel of the Duesenberg, and tried to breathe. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. He'd come down here expecting... what? An old wine cellar, some forgotten storage space filled with moth-eaten furniture. He hadn't expected this. He couldn't have expected this. No one could have expected this. He sat there for a long time, the flashlight resting in his lap, the darkness pressing in around him. His mind kept trying to calculate the value of what surrounded him, but the numbers were too big. They didn't fit in his head. They didn't fit in any head. Eventually, the cold drove him to his feet. He needed to keep moving or he'd freeze down here, buried alongside Edmund Hartwell's impossible fortune. He swept his flashlight across the room one more time, memorizing the shapes of the cars beneath their tarps. And that's when he noticed the desk. It sat in the corner of the final chamber, nearly hidden in shadow, a heavy oak desk with brass fixtures and a leather chair pulled up to its edge. Unlike everything else in the vault, the desk wasn't covered. It looked like someone had been sitting there recently, like they'd just stepped away for a moment and would return any second. Marcus approached slowly, almost reverently. Papers were scattered across the surface, letters, receipts, what looked like inventory lists written in careful cursive. And in the center of it all, a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth by decades of handling. He picked it up, felt its weight in his hands. The leather was cold but soft, preserved by the same impossible conditions that had kept everything else intact. He opened it to the first page. The personal record of Edmund Hartwell, begun this 12th day of March, 1952. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He flipped forward, scanning the entries, trying to understand. The handwriting was neat at first, precise and controlled, but as the years progressed it became shakier, more erratic. The entries grew longer, more personal. Edmund Hartwell had poured his entire life into these pages, his thoughts, his fears, his regrets, his hopes. Marcus read for over an hour, standing there in the frozen darkness with only his flashlight for company. And slowly, piece by piece, the story of the man who had built this vault began to take shape. Edmund Hartwell had been born into wealth, but he had never been born into love. His parents were cold, distant figures who treated him more like an investment than a son. When they died, the journal confirmed the rumors about the boating accident. Though Edmund never explicitly admitted to any wrongdoing, he inherited a fortune and a profound emptiness that no amount of money could fill. He tried to fill it anyway. He traveled the world, collecting beautiful things, art, jewelry, cars, anything that caught his eye. He built the manor as a monument to his isolation, a place where he could surround himself with objects since people had proven so unreliable. But the objects weren't enough. Nothing was ever enough. He wrote about loneliness in terms that made Marcus's chest ache, about lying awake at night in a house full of priceless treasures and feeling utterly worthless. He wrote about the staff who worked for him, how he kept them at arm's length because he was afraid they would betray him like everyone else had. He wrote about the few attempts he made at connection, a woman he almost proposed to in 1961, a business partner he almost trusted in 1967, and how fear had sabotaged each one. And then, in the later entries, he wrote about the vault. "I have decided to seal everything away," he had written in November of 1977. "Not because I no longer value these things, but because I have come to understand that their value was always an illusion. Beauty cannot warm you, gold cannot hold you, art cannot love you back. I spent my life accumulating treasures because I was afraid to accumulate people. Now I am 76 years old, alone in a house full of wonders, and I have never felt poorer." Marcus had to stop reading. His eyes were burning, and not just from the cold. He knew this feeling. He had lived this feeling, the endless accumulation of things that were supposed to matter, but somehow never did. The desperate attempt to fill a void that only grew larger with each passing day. The loneliness that sat in your chest like a stone, cold and heavy and permanent. He flipped to the final pages of the journal. The handwriting here was almost illegible, the words shaky and faded. "I am leaving," Edmund had written. "Not dying. I have already done that slowly over the course of my wasted life. But leaving, walking away from this monument to my failures. Perhaps I will find peace somewhere else. Perhaps not. But I cannot stay here any longer. Surrounded by beauty I can no longer see and value, I can no longer feel. If you are reading this, then you have found my vault. You have stood where I stood and seen what I spent a lifetime collecting. I do not know who you are. I do not know how you came to be here. But I know this. You paid for this house, which means you are either desperate or foolish or both. I was both once. Perhaps we are not so different. Here is my final request, my last hope for redemption. Do not do what I did. Do not let these treasures become another prison. Do not seal yourself away from the world because you are afraid of being hurt. Use what I have left to build something beautiful. Not a collection, not a monument, something alive, something warm, something that can love you back. I could not do this. Perhaps you can. Perhaps you will do what I could not." The entry ended there. No signature, no date. Just those final words, hanging in the frozen air like a prayer. Marcus closed the journal and pressed it against his chest. Tears were streaming down his face now, freezing on his cheeks before they could fall. He wasn't crying for Edmund Hartwell, not exactly. He was crying for both of them, two men separated by decades but connected by the same desperate loneliness, the same fear of connection, the same hollow ache that no amount of treasure could fill. He thought of Anna. He thought of her laugh, her warmth, the way she used to wrap her arms around him from behind while he was working and whisper that he was enough, that he would always be enough. He thought of how empty the world had felt since she died, how he had been slowly sealing himself away just like Edmund, building walls around his heart to protect it from further pain. And he thought of Lily, his daughter, his reason, the one light left in his life. He wasn't going to let her grow up the way Edmund had. He wasn't going to teach her that things mattered more than people. He wasn't going to leave her a fortune and an empty heart. He was going to do what Edmund couldn't. He was going to build something alive. Marcus stayed in the vault until his flashlight started to dim. Then he climbed the stairs slowly, one step at a time, the journal tucked under his arm like a sacred text. When he emerged into the Manor's east wing, the first grey light of dawn was filtering through the frost-covered windows. He had been down there all night. He walked through the frozen halls in a daze, his mind still reeling from everything he had seen. The paintings, the gold, the cars, the journal. The story of a man who had spent his entire life building a prison and calling it a palace. When he reached the foyer, he stopped and looked around at the shrouded furniture, the dark chandeliers, the grand staircase leading up into shadow. This house had been Edmund Hartwell's tomb, but it didn't have to be Marcus's. He thought about what to do next. Part of him wanted to keep the vault a secret, to slowly sell off the treasures and pay his debts and build a comfortable life for Lily without anyone ever knowing what he had found. But another part of him, the part that had read Edmund's journal, that had felt the weight of that lonely old man's regret, knew that secrecy was just another kind of prison. He needed help. He needed someone he could trust. Anna's voice echoed in his memory. Dorothy will know what to do. She always knows what to do. Dorothy Crane had been Anna's mentor at the university back before the illness had forced Anna to drop out of her art history program. She was 73 now, retired, living in a small cottage about 40 miles south of Holbrook. Marcus had only met her a handful of times, but Anna had adored her, called her the grandmother she never had, the only person in academia who treated her like a person instead of a student. Marcus found her number in Anna's old phone, which he'd kept charged all these months like some kind of talisman. He stared at it for a long time before pressing call. She answered on the third ring. "Hello?" "Miss Crane, this is Marcus Webb, Anna's husband." A pause, then soft and warm. "Marcus, it's been so long. How are you, dear? How is Lily?" The kindness in her voice nearly broke him. We're managing," he said. "But I need help, Miss Crane. I've found something I don't understand, something Anna would have known how to handle." Another pause. "What kind of something?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I can't explain over the phone. Can you come see me? I know it's a lot to ask, but I don't know who else to call." Dorothy was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she might have hung up. Then, "Give me the address. I'll be there tomorrow morning." She arrived at the manor just after 9, driving a battered Subaru that looked older than Marcus felt. She was a small woman, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wrapped in a wool coat that had seen better decades. When she stepped out of the car and saw the house, she stopped cold and let out a low whistle. "Hartwell Manor," she said. "Good Lord, Marcus, you bought Hartwell Manor." "You know it?" "Everyone in the art world knows it, or knew it, rather. Edmund Hartwell was one of the most prolific collectors of the 20th century. His pieces used to appear at auctions all the time back in the 50s and 60s. Then they just stopped. People assumed he'd sold everything or had it seized by creditors. But there were always rumors. Marcus led her inside, through the frozen halls and the shrouded rooms, until they reached the east wing. The iron door stood open, the darkness below waiting like a held breath. "You found the vault," Dorothy whispered. Marcus nodded. "Brace yourself." They descended together, Dorothy gripping his arm for support on the steep stone stairs. When they reached the bottom and Marcus's flashlight swept across the first chamber, Dorothy stopped walking and pressed her hand to her mouth. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Oh my God." She spent the next 4 hours moving through the vault in a kind of trance, examining paintings and jewelry and manuscripts with the reverent attention of someone who had spent her life studying beautiful things. Marcus followed, holding the flashlight, answering questions when he could, staying silent when he couldn't. Dorothy identified painting after painting, works by Vermeer and Caravaggio and Rembrandt, pieces that had been missing from the art world for decades. She opened display cases and gasped at the jewelry inside, pieces that had once belonged to European royalty, to American industrial heiresses, to women whose names appeared in history books. She knelt beside the rare manuscripts and wept. "This is impossible," she kept saying. "This is absolutely impossible." When they finally reached the cars, she had to sit down. Marcus brought her a folding chair from one of the other chambers and waited while she caught her breath. "Do you have any idea what you found?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's valuable." She laughed, a sound caught between joy and disbelief. "Valuable? Marcus, this collection is— I don't even know how to calculate it. The paintings alone would be worth 100 million, maybe more. The jewelry, the gold, the manuscripts, another 50 million at least. And the cars." She trailed off, staring at the tarps. "The cars," she continued, "are museum pieces, every single one. That Bugatti Royale, there are only 6 in the world. They almost never come to market. The last one sold for over $30 million, and that was 20 years ago." Marcus sat down heavily on the stone floor. "How much?" he asked. "Total. How much is all of this worth?" Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at him with eyes that held something between wonder and fear. $275 million, she said. "At minimum, possibly more, depending on provenance and condition. What Marcus does next will determine whether this fortune becomes a blessing or a curse. But first, shadows from his past are about to reappear, and they want their share. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more." Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but sit there on the cold stone floor and try to make that number fit inside his head. $275 million. It was more money than he would have earned in 1,000 lifetimes of carpentry, more money than anyone in Holbrook had ever seen, more money than he knew what to do with. "Marcus," Dorothy said gently, kneeling beside him, "are you all right?" He laughed, a sound that came out more like a sob. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know anything anymore." She put her hand on his shoulder. "Tell me how you found this place. Tell me everything." So he did. He told her about Anna's death, about his family's abandonment, about the auction listing he'd seen in the newspaper. He told her about Lily and the way she called the manor a castle. He told her about finding the iron door and waiting weeks for the locksmith and descending those stairs in the dark. And he told her about Edmund's journal, about the lonely man who had spent his life collecting beauty because he was afraid to collect love. When he finished, Dorothy was crying. "Anna would be so proud of you," she said. "You know that, don't you?" Marcus wiped his eyes. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle any of this." Dorothy squeezed his shoulder. "You don't have to know yet, but there are people who can help. Lawyers who specialize in estate discoveries, curators who can verify provenance, security experts who can protect all of this until you decide what to do with it." "I don't have money for lawyers and experts," she smiled. "Marcus, you have $275 million. You can afford a few consultations." He knew she was right, but something else was nagging at him, something darker. "How do I know I can trust them? How do I know they won't take advantage?" Dorothy studied his face for a long moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a business card, yellowed with age. "This is the name of a man I worked with for 30 years. He handled the authentication of some of the most valuable pieces in the world. He's retired now, but he owes me a favor. Call him. Tell him I sent you. He'll make sure you're protected." Marcus took the card. The name on it was Robert Ashworth, followed by a phone number with a Boston area code. "Thank you," Marcus said, "for everything." Dorothy shook her head. "Don't thank me yet. What you've found here, it's going to change your life, but change isn't always easy. There will be people who want what you have, people who will try to take it, people who will pretend to love you because of what you own instead of who you are." She paused, her eyes grave. Edmund Hartwell learned that lesson the hard way. Don't make his mistakes. Marcus thought of his brothers, his father, the family who had abandoned him when he needed them most. "I won't," he said. "I promise." The next few days passed in a blur. Marcus called Robert Ashworth, who turned out to be a crisp, no-nonsense man in his 80s, with a voice like gravel and a mind like a steel trap. He agreed to fly out the following week to examine the collection and connect Marcus with the right people. Lawyers, security consultants, tax experts, the whole alphabet soup of professionals needed to handle a discovery of this magnitude. "You're going to want to keep this quiet," Robert advised during their first phone call, "at least until we have a full inventory and a legal framework in place. News travels fast in the art world, and there are vultures everywhere." Marcus agreed. The last thing he wanted was attention. He just wanted to figure out what to do with this fortune in a way that would honor Edmund's final wish, to build something alive, something warm, something that could love him back. But secrets have a way of slipping through the cracks. And in a small town like Holbrook, cracks were everywhere. It started with the neighbor. Martha, the kind widow who watched Lily after school, noticed the extra traffic on the road to Hartwell Manor. She noticed the unfamiliar cars, the out-of-state plates, the men in suits who looked nothing like the flannel-wearing locals. She didn't mean any harm. She was just curious. She mentioned it to her friend at the post office, who mentioned it to her cousin at the grocery store, who mentioned it to his wife, who happened to work at the diner where half the town ate breakfast every morning. Within a week, everyone in Holbrook was talking about Marcus Webb and his mysterious visitors. Rumors spread like wildfire on dry grass. Some said he'd found gold. Others said he'd found bodies. A few creative souls claimed he'd discovered proof of alien life hidden beneath the manor's foundations. Marcus tried to ignore it. He focused on Lily, on the work that still needed to be done to make the manor livable, on the endless paperwork and phone calls that came with managing an impossible fortune. But the whispers followed him everywhere. Into town, into the hardware store, into the gas station where he filled up his truck every week. And then, 2 weeks after Dorothy's visit, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. He almost didn't answer. But something made him press the green button, some instinct he couldn't name. "Marcus!" The voice on the other end was warm and familiar and made his blood run cold. "Little brother, it's been too long." Vincent, his older brother, the one who had laughed when Marcus asked for help with Anna's medical bills, the one who hadn't shown up to the funeral, the one who hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't acknowledged Marcus's existence in over 2 years. "Vincent," Marcus said, his voice flat, "what do you want?" "Can't a guy just call to check in on family?" Vincent's laugh was too loud, too forced. "I heard you're doing well. Bought some old estate outside of town. People are saying you hit the jackpot or something." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. People say a lot of things. "Yeah, well, I figured there might be some truth to it this time. So I thought, hey, maybe I should reach out, see how my little brother's doing. Maybe even come visit, you know? Catch up." Marcus closed his eyes. He could see where this was going. Could feel the familiar pattern clicking into place like gears in a machine he'd watched turn his whole life. "I'm busy," he said. "The house needs a lot of work." "Oh, come on, Marcus. You can make time for family, can't you? Especially after everything we've been through together. Everything we've been through." Marcus almost laughed. What they'd been through together was Vincent making fun of him for choosing carpentry instead of college. Vincent borrowing money and never paying it back. Vincent showing up drunk to Anna's birthday party and insulting her cooking. Vincent disappearing whenever things got hard and reappearing whenever he smelled opportunity. "I'll think about it," Marcus said, because saying no would only make Vincent more persistent. "Great, that's great. I'll call again soon. Maybe Dean and Dad can come too, you know? Make it a real reunion." The line went dead before Marcus could respond. He stood there in the frozen foyer of Hartwell Manor, phone pressed against his ear, listening to nothing. The weight of what was coming settled over him like a second winter, cold and heavy and inescapable. His family had abandoned him when he was drowning. Now that he was rising, they wanted back in. But Marcus Webb was not the same man he'd been 2 years ago. Grief had stripped him down to his foundations. Loss had rebuilt him stronger. And a dying man's journal had shown him what happened when you let fear and bitterness hollow you out from the inside. He wasn't going to let that happen, not to himself, not to Lily. He walked through the manor until he found her, his daughter, his light, sitting cross-legged in the library, with a book of fairy tales spread open in her lap. She looked up when he entered, her face bright with discovery. "Daddy, look! I found a book about a princess who lives in a castle made of ice, just like ours." Marcus knelt beside her, his eyes burning. He thought of Edmund Hartwell, alone in this vast house, surrounded by treasures he couldn't enjoy because he had no one to share them with. He thought of his brothers and father, circling now like sharks who smelled blood in the water. He thought of Anna, her voice in his memory, telling him to be brave. "Lily," he said softly, "do you want to see something amazing?" She nodded, eyes wide. "Come with me," he said. "There's something in the basement I need to show you, something that's going to change our lives." He took her hand, small and warm and trusting, and led her toward the east wing, toward the iron door, toward the impossible truth waiting in the frozen dark below. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Lily's eyes grew wider with every step they took down the stone staircase. Marcus held her hand tight, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness ahead of them, revealing the frozen walls and the ancient steps worn smooth by decades of solitude. She didn't speak, she barely breathed, and when they reached the bottom and the light swept across the first chamber of the vault, she let out a sound that was half gasp, half whisper. "Daddy," she breathed. "Is this real?" Marcus knelt beside her, his eyes following hers as she tried to take it all in. The paintings on the walls, the display cases filled with glittering jewels, the shapes of furniture and artifacts stretching back into the shadows. "It's real, sweetheart. All of it." Are we like the people in my storybooks now? The ones who find treasure?" He smiled, though his chest felt tight. "Something like that. But Lily, I need you to understand something important. This treasure, it doesn't make us better than anyone else. It doesn't make us special. What makes us special is how we choose to use it." Lily thought about this for a moment, her small face scrunched in concentration. Then she looked up at him with those dark eyes, so much like Anna's. "Mama always said the best treasures are the ones you share." Marcus's throat closed up. He pulled her into a hug and held her there in the frozen darkness, surrounded by $275 million worth of beauty, and felt richer than he ever had in his life. "Yeah, baby," he whispered. "That's exactly what Mama said." They explored together for nearly an hour. Lily named everything she saw. The paintings became portraits of queens and wizards. The jewelry became magical artifacts. The cars became sleeping dragons waiting to be awakened. Marcus watched her transform Edmund Hartwell's lonely vault into a wonderland of imagination, and he realized that this was what the old man had been missing. Not more treasures, not more locks, just someone to share it with. When they finally climbed back up to the manor, the winter sun was setting through the frost-covered windows, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. Lily was exhausted but happy, chattering about all the things she wanted to show her friends, all the adventures they could have in their castle. Marcus let her talk. He didn't have the heart to tell her that keeping this secret was going to be harder than finding it. The call from Vincent was just the beginning. 3 days later, Dean called. His voice was softer than Vincent's, more careful, but the message was the same. "Hey, Marcus, long time. Listen, I know things have been complicated between us, but family's family, right? I was thinking maybe we could get together, clear the air." Marcus said he'd think about it. He didn't. Then came his father. Walter Webb hadn't spoken to Marcus since Anna's funeral, if you could even call that speaking. He'd shown up late, stayed in the back, and left before the reception. When Marcus had tried to approach him afterward, Walter had waved him off. "Can't do this," he'd muttered. "Can't be around all this death." Like grief was contagious. Like Marcus's loss was an inconvenience to be avoided. Now, 2 years later, Walter's voice came through the phone like nothing had happened. "Son, I've been meaning to reach out. Heard you're doing well. Your brothers and I were thinking we might drive up this weekend. See this house everyone's talking about?" Marcus gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Now, Marcus, don't be like that. We're family. Whatever happened before, we should be able to put it behind us, especially now that things are looking up for you." Especially now. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus could hear what his father wasn't saying. "Especially now that you might have something we want." "I'll call you back," Marcus said, and hung up before Walter could respond. But they didn't wait for him to call back. They came anyway. It was Saturday morning, just before 9, when Marcus heard the crunch of tires on frozen gravel. He was in the kitchen, trying to get the ancient stove to cooperate, while Lily played with her dolls in the next room. He looked out the window and felt his stomach drop. 3 vehicles were pulling up the long driveway: Vincent's black pickup, Dean's silver sedan, and their father's old Buick, dented and mud-splattered, looking as worn out as the man who drove it. Marcus stepped onto the front porch and watched them approach. His breath hung in the air like a warning. The cold bit at his face, but he didn't feel it. All he felt was the slow burn of anger building in his chest. Vincent got out first. He was 52 now, thick around the middle, with the same smug smile Marcus remembered from childhood. Dean followed, thinner and more nervous, his eyes darting around the property like he was already calculating its value. And then Walter emerged from the Buick, 71 years old but still carrying himself like the man who had raised 3 sons, with silence and disappointment. "Marcus," Vincent called, spreading his arms wide as he approached. "Look at this place. Man, you really hit the jackpot, didn't you?" Marcus didn't move from the porch. "What are you doing here?" "We came to see family." Vincent stopped at the bottom of the steps, his smile faltering slightly. "What? We can't visit." "You didn't visit when Anna was dying. You didn't visit when I couldn't pay rent. You didn't visit when Lily was asking where her grandpa was." Walter's face hardened. "Don't start with that. You know I don't handle that kind of thing well." "That kind of thing?" Marcus felt something crack inside him. "My wife died. Your daughter-in-law, the mother of your grandchild, and you called it that kind of thing." Dean stepped forward, trying to play peacemaker like he always did. "Look, Marcus, we know things got difficult, but we're here now, right? Trying to make it right. Trying to make it right." Marcus laughed, a sound that held no humor. 2 years of silence, 2 years of me drowning while you all looked the other way. And now you show up, just weeks after I buy this place, just when rumors start spreading about what I might have found. Vincent's smile disappeared entirely. "You think that's what this is about? Money? Isn't it?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "Daddy?" Lily's voice came from behind him. Marcus turned to see her standing in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, looking at the strangers with wide, uncertain eyes. "Who are they?" Marcus's heart shattered. His daughter didn't recognize her own uncles, her own grandfather. They were strangers to her, and they had made themselves that way. "Go back inside, sweetheart," he said softly. "I'll be there in a minute." But Lily didn't move. She stood there, watching, listening, her small face full of confusion. Vincent seized on the moment. "Hey there, Lily. Remember me? Uncle Vinny? I used to bounce you on my knee when you were just a little—" "She doesn't remember you," Marcus cut him off, "because you haven't been around. None of you have." Walter took a step forward, his voice dropping into the low, dangerous tone Marcus remembered from childhood. "Now you listen to me. We're your family. blood, and family has rights. We should have been told about whatever you found here. We should have been included." "Included?" Marcus descended the porch steps slowly, placing himself between his family and his daughter. "You want to talk about being included? Where were you when I was working double shifts to pay Anna's medical bills? Where were you when I was selling our house, the house where Lily was born, just to cover the funeral costs? Where were you when I was sitting in that apartment alone, trying to explain to a 5-year-old why Mama wasn't coming home?" Dean looked away. Vincent's jaw tightened. Walter just stared, unmoved. "You don't get to waltz back in now," Marcus continued, his voice rising. "You don't get to claim any part of what I've built here. You abandoned me. You abandoned Lily. You're not family. You're just strangers who happen to share my blood." Vincent's composure finally cracked. "You self-righteous little... Do you have any idea how hard things have been for us too? The economy tanked. Dean lost his job. Dad's been living on Social Security for years, and now you're sitting on God knows how much money and you want to lecture us about family?" "I didn't ask for this," Marcus said quietly. "I didn't plan for this. But whatever I have now, I earned it by being here when no one else was, by not giving up when everyone told me to, by putting Lily first when the rest of you were too busy with your own lives to care." "You always were the dramatic one," Walter muttered, "just like your mother." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His mother had died of cancer when he was 19. She had been kind and warm, and everything his father wasn't, and Walter had spent the last 20 years treating her memory like something to be resented rather than cherished. "Get off my property," Marcus said. His voice was steady now, cold as the winter air. "All of you." Vincent's face twisted. "You can't do this. We'll get lawyers. We'll prove that whatever's in that house should be divided among the family. You can't just—" "I can and I am." Marcus took another step forward. "This house was sold at public auction. I paid for it with my own money. Whatever's inside belongs to me and Lily, legally, morally, in every way that matters." "We'll see about that," Vincent snarled. "You think you can cut us out? You think you can—" "Daddy?" Lily's voice again, smaller this time, scared. Marcus turned to see her still standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. She was watching her family tear itself apart, and she was terrified. Marcus's rage evaporated. He walked back to the porch, scooped Lily into his arms and held her close. "It's okay, baby," he whispered. "Everything's going to be okay." He looked over his shoulder at the 3 men standing in his driveway, his brothers, his father, the people who should have been his support system, his safety net, his home. They looked small now, small and petty and sad. "Leave," he said, "and don't come back." They stood there for a long moment, uncertainty flickering across their faces. Then Vincent turned and stalked back to his truck. Dean followed, shoulders slumped. Walter was the last to move. He stared at Marcus with something that might have been regret, might have been anger, might have been nothing at all. "You'll regret this," he said finally, "pushing away your own blood." "No," Marcus replied. "I won't." Walter got in his car and drove away. Marcus watched until all 3 vehicles had disappeared around the bend in the road. Then he carried Lily inside, sat down in front of the fireplace, and let her cry against his chest until she fell asleep. The fallout came faster than Marcus expected. Within a week, he received a letter from a law firm in Burlington. Vincent had actually done it. He'd hired a lawyer. The letter claimed that Hartwell Manor and its contents should be considered a family inheritance, and that Marcus's siblings and father were entitled to an equal share. Marcus read the letter twice, then set it aside and called Robert Ashworth. "It's nonsense," Robert said after Marcus explained the situation. "The property was sold at a county auction. You purchased it legally. There's no inheritance claim because you're not related to Edmund Hartwell." "But they're saying because I'm family, I should share whatever I found." "That's not how the law works. What you found in that house belongs to you, period. They can make noise, but they don't have a case. Marcus exhaled slowly. So what do I do? You hire your own lawyer, someone local, someone who knows the county courts. I can recommend a few names, and you document everything, the purchase, the discovery, the inventory. We're already doing most of that for the authentication process. This is just insurance. Marcus thanked him and hung up. He sat in the cold kitchen of Hartwell Manor, watching the winter light fade through the windows, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. He had wanted a home for Lily, a fresh start, a chance to build something after losing everything. Instead, he had found himself at the center of a family war, a legal battle, and a secret worth more than most people could imagine. But he wasn't going to let it break him. He'd survived Anna's death. He'd survived the betrayal of his family. He'd survived 2 years of grinding poverty and grinding grief. He could survive this too. The town's reaction was more complicated. Holbrook was a small community where everyone knew everyone, and news of Marcus's discovery had spread like wildfire through dry brush. Some people were supportive. Martha brought casseroles. Ray Jenkins offered to help with renovations. The librarian slipped Marcus books on art history with knowing smiles. But others were suspicious, jealous, resentful. He heard the whispers when he walked down Main Street, saw the sidelong glances at the grocery store, felt the temperature drop whenever he entered the diner. "Must be nice," someone muttered loud enough for him to hear. "Finding millions just sitting in your basement while the rest of us work for a living." Marcus didn't respond. What was there to say? He had worked for a living his entire adult life. His hands were still calloused from carpentry. His back still ached from years of lifting and hauling. The treasure he'd found hadn't erased any of that. It hadn't brought Anna back. It hadn't healed the wounds his family had inflicted. It had just given him options he never expected to have. Then the reporter showed up. Her name was Janet Price, mid-30s, sharp-eyed and ambitious, working for a regional newspaper out of Montpelier. She cornered Marcus outside the hardware store one afternoon, notebook in hand, smile too wide. "Mr. Webb, I'm doing a story on Hartwell Manor. The community's buzzing about what you might have found there. Care to comment?" Marcus kept walking. "No comment." She fell into step beside him. "People are saying it's worth millions. Some are saying hundreds of millions. Is there any truth to that?" No comment. "There are also rumors about your family, that they're contesting your ownership, that there might be a legal battle brewing. Is that accurate?" Marcus stopped. He turned to face her, letting her see the exhaustion in his eyes, the steel beneath it. "What I found in that house is my business. My family situation is my business. I'm not looking for publicity. I'm not looking for attention. I'm just trying to give my daughter a home." Janet's smile faltered. "The public has a right to know. The public has a right to nothing that doesn't belong to them." Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. "You want a story? Go find someone else's life to dig through. Mine's not for sale." He walked away before she could respond, but he knew it wouldn't end there. People like Janet Price didn't give up easily. They dug and probed and pushed until they got what they wanted, and the more attention he attracted, the harder everything would become. Dorothy returned on a grey Thursday morning, her Subaru loaded with boxes of documents and a bottle of wine she insisted Marcus would need by the time she was finished. "I have news," she said as they sat in the Manor's library, the fire crackling in the hearth, Lily playing quietly in the corner. "Good news and complicated news." Marcus took a deep breath. "Start with the good." "The paintings are legitimate, every single one. I've traced provenance on over 40 pieces so far, and they all check out. Edmund Hartwell was meticulous. He kept receipts, certificates of authenticity, shipping records. Everything was purchased legally, most of it through private sales and auctions in Europe between 1930 and 1970. Marcus felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. So, no one can claim they were stolen? No, and the same appears to be true for the jewelry and the manuscripts. Edmund may have been a recluse, but he was an honest one. He never cheated anyone, never cut corners. His collection is clean. And the complicated news? Dorothy reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, covered in the same careful handwriting Marcus recognized from Edmund's journal. "I found this hidden in a compartment at the back of the desk," she said. "It's a will, unofficial, never filed with any court, but it's dated November 15th, 1977, just weeks before Edmund disappeared." Marcus took the paper with trembling hands. The language was formal, legal, but the message was clear. Edmund Hartwell, being of sound mind and body, bequeathed his entire estate, the manor, the land, and everything within it, to whoever legally purchased the property. "He knew someone would come eventually," Dorothy said softly. "He knew the county would auction the house once he was gone, and he wanted whoever bought it to have everything, free and clear." Marcus stared at the document, but he never filed it. No, probably because he had no lawyer he trusted, no one he could confide in. He was so isolated by the end, so afraid of betrayal. He just wrote it down and hoped it would be enough. "Is it enough? Legally?" Dorothy hesitated. "It's complicated. An unfiled will doesn't carry the same weight as a registered one. But combined with the circumstances, the legal purchase, the fact that there are no surviving heirs, the evidence that Edmund intended exactly this outcome, a good lawyer could argue that his wishes should be honored." Marcus set the will down carefully, reverently. "He wanted this. He wanted someone like me to find it." "I think so, yes. I think he spent his whole life waiting for someone who would understand, someone who would do what he couldn't." Marcus thought of the journal entries he'd read, the loneliness, the regret, the desperate hope that someday, somehow, the treasures he'd locked away might mean something to someone. "He didn't want another collector," Marcus said slowly. "He didn't want someone who would just take the fortune and disappear. He wanted someone who would share it." Dorothy nodded. "That's my interpretation too." Marcus stood and walked to the window. Outside, the winter landscape stretched endlessly, white and cold and still. But somewhere beneath all that ice, life was waiting. Spring would come, things would grow. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what to do with all of this. And I keep coming back to something Lily said." "What's that?" "She said the best treasures are the ones you share. That's what Anna always told her." Dorothy smiled. Anna was a wise woman. "She was." Marcus turned back to face her. "I don't want to sell this collection. Not all of it anyway. Maybe a few pieces, enough to secure Lily's future and fix up the manor. But the rest, I want people to see it. I want them to understand who Edmund was, what he built, why it matters." "You want to open a museum?" "More than that." Marcus's voice grew stronger as the vision took shape in his mind. "I want to create a foundation, something that preserves Edmund's legacy, but also gives back. Scholarships for single parents trying to get an education. Grants for families facing medical debt. Programs that teach kids trades, carpentry, mechanics, the kind of skills that gave me a way to survive when everything else fell apart." Dorothy's eyes glistened. "That's beautiful, Marcus. It's what Edmund wanted. He said in his journal, 'Use what I have left to build something alive, something warm, something that can love you back.'" Marcus's voice cracked. "I know what it feels like to be alone, to be struggling, to think that no one cares whether you make it or not. If I can use this fortune to show people that someone does care, that's worth more than all the paintings and cars in the world." Lily looked up from her dolls. "Daddy, are we going to share our castle?" Marcus knelt beside her, smoothing her dark curls. "Yeah, baby, we're going to share it. We're going to let people come see all the beautiful things, and we're going to help families who are going through hard times, just like we did." Lily thought about this. Then she smiled, bright and pure. "Can we call it something special?" "Like what?" She scrunched up her face, thinking hard. Then her eyes lit up. "The Hartwell House of Second Chances, because everyone deserves a second chance, right? That's what you always say." Marcus's throat tightened. He pulled her into a hug and held her there, feeling her small heart beat against his chest. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. That's exactly what we'll call it." Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into planning. He worked with Robert Ashworth to complete the inventory and authentication of the collection. He met with lawyers, real ones this time, specialists in non-profit law and estate planning, to structure the foundation. He consulted with architects about renovating the manor to accommodate visitors while preserving its historic character. The legal threat from his family fizzled out quietly. Vincent's lawyer had taken one look at the case and advised him to drop it. There was no claim to make. The property had been purchased legally. The contents belonged to Marcus. End of story. Marcus heard through the grapevine that Vincent was furious, that he'd accused the lawyer of being incompetent, of not trying hard enough, that he'd even threatened to represent himself, to take the case all the way to the Supreme Court if he had to. But Vincent didn't know how to file a lawsuit, didn't know how to navigate the legal system without someone to do it for him. And in the end, his rage burned itself out, leaving nothing but ashes and silence. Walter called once more, a few weeks after the confrontation. Marcus almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Son." Walter's voice was different now, smaller, tired. "I've been thinking about what you said, about not being there when you needed me." Marcus waited, saying nothing. "Your mother, when she died, it broke something in me, something I never fixed. And when Anna got sick, when I saw you going through the same thing I went through, I couldn't face it. I ran away. I know that now. Knowing it doesn't change anything." "No, it doesn't." Walter's breath shuddered through the phone. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry, for all of it, for the man I wasn't." Marcus closed his eyes. He thought of all the years of distance, all the missed birthdays and empty chairs, all the moments when a father's presence might have made a difference. "Goodbye, Dad," he said softly, and hung up. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. A door closing quietly instead of slamming, a chapter ending with a period instead of an exclamation point. Maybe that was enough. Spring came slowly to Vermont that year. The ice retreated inch by inch, revealing the bones of the land beneath. Brown grass, bare trees, the first tentative shoots of green pushing through the frozen earth. Marcus watched the transformation through the manor's tall windows and felt something similar happening inside himself. The Hartwell House of Second Chances was taking shape. Contractors had begun work on the ground floor, preparing gallery spaces and accessibility features. A team from the State Historical Society had arrived to document the collection. Dorothy had connected Marcus with curators from museums across the country, all of them eager to help catalogue and display Edmund's treasures. And through it all, Lily remained his compass. She helped design the children's wing, where young visitors could learn about art and history through hands-on activities. She chose the colors for the walls, soft blues and warm golds, like the sky at sunset. She even wrote the welcome message that would greet every guest. "Welcome to our castle. We hope you find something wonderful." Marcus framed it himself and hung it by the front door. The night before the foundation officially launched, Marcus walked through the manor alone. The construction was finished. The galleries were ready. The first exhibit, a selection of paintings from Edmund's collection, would open to the public in the morning. He stopped in the library, where it had all begun. The hidden door stood open now, the stone staircase leading down to the vault lit by soft electric lights instead of a single trembling flashlight. He descended slowly, one step at a time, and stood in the space that had been Edmund Hartwell's secret for nearly 50 years. The cars were still here, too valuable to move, too beautiful to hide. They would become the centerpiece of a rotating exhibition, each one with its own story, its own history. Visitors would learn not just about the machines themselves, but about the man who had collected them, about his loneliness, his regret, his final hope for redemption. Marcus pulled Edmund's journal from his pocket. He had carried it with him for months now, reading and rereading the old man's words, trying to understand the life that had led to this moment. He opened to the final entry and read it one more time. "Do not do what I did. Do not let these treasures become another prison. Use what I have left to build something beautiful, something alive, something warm, something that can love you back." Marcus closed the journal and pressed it to his chest. "I did it," he whispered into the silence. "I built something alive." And somewhere in the frozen darkness, he could have sworn he heard an old man sigh with relief. The morning of the grand opening broke clear and cold over Holbrook, Vermont. Marcus stood on the front steps of Hartwell Manor, no, the Hartwell House of Second Chances, and watched the sun rise over the hills. The sky turned from deep purple to rose to gold, painting the old stone walls in colors that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. He had barely slept the night before, not from anxiety, but from something closer to wonder. After everything he had been through, Anna's death, his family's betrayal, the desperate gamble on a frozen manor no one wanted, he was standing on the threshold of something he never could have imagined. Lily appeared beside him, still in her pajamas, her dark curls wild from sleep. She slipped her small hand into his and leaned against his leg. "Is today the big day, Daddy?" Marcus smiled down at her. "Today's the big day, sweetheart." "Are lots of people going to come?" "I hope so. Dorothy says she's been getting calls all week. People from all over the state want to see what we've built." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "I hope they like the welcome sign. I worked really hard on it." Marcus knelt down and pulled her into a hug. "They're going to love it, just like I love you." She giggled and squirmed away, running back inside to get dressed. Marcus watched her go, feeling his heart swell with something that had become unfamiliar over the past 2 years, but was slowly returning: joy. By 10 o'clock, cars were already lining the long driveway. Martha had organized a volunteer parking crew, farmers and retirees mostly, waving orange flags and directing traffic with the efficiency of air traffic controllers. Dorothy stood at the front entrance, greeting visitors and handing out brochures she had designed herself, featuring photographs of the collection and the story of Edmund Hartwell. Marcus had debated how much to share about Edmund. The man had been so private in life, so protective of his secrets. But in the end, Marcus decided that honoring Edmund's legacy meant being honest about who he was: the loneliness, the fear, the regret, and ultimately the hope that someone would find his treasures and do what he couldn't. The brochure told that story. Visitors read it as they waited in line, their faces softening as they understood that this wasn't just a museum. It was a memorial, a second chance for a man who had died alone, surrounded by beauty he couldn't enjoy. The first guest through the door was a woman in her 70s, leaning on a carved wooden cane. She introduced herself as Eleanor Crane, Dorothy's older sister it turned out, and said she had driven 4 hours from Connecticut just to see the collection. "My late husband was a mechanic," she told Marcus as he walked her through the first gallery. "Worked on cars his whole life. Never got to see anything like this except in magazines." She stopped in front of the Duesenberg, her eyes filling with tears. He would have given anything to be here. Marcus stood beside her in silence, letting her have the moment. This was what he had wanted, Not crowds or cameras or headlines, just people connecting with something beautiful, people feeling less alone. By noon, over 300 visitors had passed through the doors. Families wandered the galleries. Children pressed their faces against the glass cases. Couples held hands as they studied paintings that had been hidden from the world for nearly 50 years. A group of veterans gathered around the cars, swapping stories about the machines they had worked on in their youth. A young woman sat on a bench in the manuscript room, sketching one of the illuminated texts with careful precision. And through it all, Lily served as an unofficial tour guide, leading groups of children through her favorite rooms, explaining the magic behind each treasure with the authority of someone who had lived with these wonders for months. She showed them the secret compartment in Edmund's desk where Dorothy had found the will. She pointed out the dragons sleeping under the car tarps. She told them about the lonely man who had built this castle and the wish he had made for someone to share it. Marcus watched her from across the room, his throat tight with pride. She was so much like Anna, the same warmth, the same gift for making strangers feel welcome. Anna would have been so proud of her, of both of them. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus was in the library, adjusting a display case, when Dorothy appeared at his elbow with an expression he couldn't read. "There's someone here to see you," she said quietly. "Says his name is Edmund Hartwell III. Marcus's heart stopped. What? He claims to be Edmund's great-nephew, says he just found out about the collection and wants to talk. For a long moment, Marcus couldn't move. He had assumed Edmund had no living relatives. Every record they'd found suggested he was the last of his line. But what if that wasn't true? What if there were heirs out there who had a legitimate claim to everything Marcus had built? "Where is he?" Marcus asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "Waiting in the foyer." Marcus walked through the crowded galleries, his mind racing. He found the man standing near the entrance, studying Lily's welcome sign with an unreadable expression. He was in his 60s, tall and thin, with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that looked out of place in rural Vermont. "Mr. Hartwell?" Marcus extended his hand. "I'm Marcus Webb." The man turned, and Marcus saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not greed or hostility, but something closer to wonder. "Mr. Webb, thank you for seeing me. I know this must be unusual." "That's one word for it." Edmund III smiled faintly. "I suppose I should explain. My grandfather was Charles Hartwell, Edmund's younger brother. They had a falling out in 1947. I never knew the details, but they never spoke again. My grandfather moved to California, changed his name, and never talked about his family. I only discovered my connection to Edmund last year, when I was going through old documents after my mother's death." Marcus studied him carefully. "And now you're here because you heard about the collection." "I'm here because I heard about what you're doing with it." The man's voice was soft but sincere. "I've spent the past few weeks researching you, Mr. Webb. Your story, your foundation, your vision for this place." He paused. "I'm not here to make a claim. I have no legal right to anything Edmund left behind, even if I wanted to, which I don't." "Then why are you here?" Edmund III reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather box. He opened it to reveal a pocket watch, old and worn, with the Hartwell family crest engraved on the back. "This belonged to my great-uncle," he said. "My grandfather kept it his whole life, even though they never reconciled. I found it in his things after he died." He held it out to Marcus. "I think it should be here, with the rest of Edmund's legacy." Marcus stared at the watch, then at the man offering it. "I don't understand. Why would you give this up?" "Because you're doing what my family never could." Edmund III's voice cracked slightly. "You're honoring him. You're sharing what he built. You're making sure he didn't die forgotten." He pressed the watch into Marcus's hands. "That's worth more than any inheritance." Marcus looked down at the pocket watch, feeling its weight, its history, its meaning. Then he looked back at the man who had driven across the country to give it away. "Would you like to see the collection?" Marcus asked. "The real collection, not just what's on display." Edmund III's eyes widened. "You would show me?" "Your family. Not mine, but his. I think he would have wanted you to see it." They walked through the galleries together, Dorothy trailing behind, and Marcus showed him everything. The paintings, the jewelry, the manuscripts, the cars. He showed him the vault beneath the east wing, the stone stairs descending into darkness, the treasures that had been hidden for nearly 50 years. And he showed him the journal, the words of a lonely man who had spent his life collecting beauty because he was afraid to collect love. Edmund III wept when he read the final entry. He stood in that frozen vault surrounded by more wealth than most people could imagine, and he cried for an uncle he had never known. "He was so alone," he whispered. "All those years, all that beauty, and no one to share it with." Marcus nodded. "That's why I'm doing this. So his loneliness meant something. So his story doesn't end with him dying alone in an empty house." Edmund III wiped his eyes and straightened his shoulders. "What can I do to help?" Marcus smiled. "How do you feel about serving on a foundation board?" The Hartwell House of Second Chances didn't just change Marcus's life, it changed Holbrook. Within 6 months of opening, the town had seen more visitors than in the previous decade combined. The diner expanded to accommodate the lunch crowds. A new bed and breakfast opened near the highway. The hardware store started stocking art supplies. Young people who had left for bigger cities began trickling back, drawn by opportunities that hadn't existed before. But the foundation's impact reached far beyond tourism. True to his vision, Marcus had established programs to help families in crisis. The first scholarship, the Anna Webb Memorial Fund, went to a single mother in Burlington who was studying to become a nurse. The second went to a veteran in Montpelier who wanted to start a small engine repair business. By the end of the first year, they had awarded over $200,000 in grants and scholarships, all funded by careful sales from the collection and donations from supporters who believed in the mission. Marcus kept his promise about the trades program too. Every Saturday, the Manor's old carriage house, now converted into a workshop, filled with teenagers learning carpentry, electrical work, and automotive repair. Marcus taught most of the classes himself, his hands still calloused, his patience endless. He showed them how to read a level and swing a hammer and fix what was broken instead of throwing it away. "Everyone deserves to know how to build something," he told them. "Everyone deserves to feel capable." Lily grew up surrounded by all of it, the treasures, the visitors, the programs, the community that had formed around her father's impossible dream. She learned to give tours before she learned to ride a bike. She helped sort scholarship applications when other kids were playing video games. She understood, in a way that most children couldn't, that wealth meant nothing if you didn't use it to lift others up. On her 8th birthday, Marcus took her down to the vault for a special celebration. Just the two of them, surrounded by the cars and paintings and gold that had changed their lives. He had hung photographs on one wall, pictures of Anna, of the scholarship recipients, of the families the foundation had helped. A gallery of lives touched by what they had built. "Do you remember what Mama used to say?" Marcus asked, sitting beside her on the cold stone floor. "About the best treasures?" Lily nodded, her eyes bright. "The best treasures are the ones you share." "That's right." Marcus put his arm around her. "And that's what we've done. We've shared this with the whole world." "Do you think Mama can see it? From heaven?" Marcus's throat tightened. "Yeah, sweetheart. I think she can. And I think she's really, really proud." Lily leaned against him, her small body warm against his side. "I'm proud too, Daddy. Of you." Marcus held her close and let the tears fall. He didn't try to hide them anymore. Grief and joy could exist together. He had learned that. Love didn't end just because someone was gone. It changed, transformed, found new ways to express itself. Anna was still with them, in every decision Marcus made, in every life they touched. The second year brought challenges Marcus hadn't anticipated. A burst pipe flooded the east wing and damaged 3 paintings. A winter storm knocked out power for 6 days and nearly froze the climate-controlled vault. A group of protesters showed up one weekend, claiming that the collection should be in a real museum, where experts could manage it properly. Marcus handled each crisis with the same quiet determination that had gotten him through Anna's illness and his family's abandonment. He fixed what was broken. He improved what needed improving. He listened to criticism and learned from it when it was valid, and when it wasn't valid, he let it roll off his back like water off stone. Dorothy, now officially the Foundation's Director of Collections, marveled at his resilience. Most people would have crumbled by now, she told him one evening, after a particularly brutal board meeting about budget projections. You just keep going. Marcus shrugged. I've had practice. That's not what I mean. I mean you don't just survive, you grow. Every obstacle makes you stronger, more focused, more clear about what matters. Marcus thought about that for a long moment. When Anna was dying, he said finally, I learned that the worst thing in the world isn't pain. It's helplessness, not being able to do anything to change what's happening. He looked around at the manor, at the galleries, at the photographs on the walls. All of this, is the opposite of helplessness. This is action. This is choice. This is building something instead of watching something fall apart. Dorothy smiled. Edmund would have liked you. I think he would have liked anyone who tried to understand him. That's all he wanted, really, to be understood. The news about the Foundation spread slowly at first, then faster. Regional newspapers picked up the story, then national outlets, then international ones. Journalists flew in from London and Tokyo and Sydney, all wanting to interview the widowed carpenter who had turned a $1,200 auction purchase into a $275 million charitable empire. Marcus hated the attention. He gave interviews only when Dorothy convinced him it would help the Foundation, and even then, he kept them short. He didn't want to be famous. He didn't want to be a symbol or a story or an inspiration. He just wanted to do the work. But the work was the story, and the more people heard it, the more they wanted to help. Donations poured in from around the world, small contributions and large ones, anonymous gifts and named endowments. A tech billionaire in California donated $5 million to expand the scholarship program. A retired teacher in Florida left her entire estate to the Foundation in her will. A group of elementary school students in Ohio raised $800 through a bake sale and sent it with a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for showing us that sharing is the best kind of treasure." Marcus framed that note and hung it next to Lily's welcome sign. It reminded him why he was doing this. Not for the billionaires or the headlines. For the children who still believed that kindness mattered. 3 years after the Foundation launched, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. A woman's voice, hesitant and unfamiliar. "Mr. Webb? My name is Sarah. Sarah Hartwell. I'm Edmund III's daughter." Marcus sat down slowly. "How can I help you, Sarah?" "I've been following what you've done, what you've built, and I wanted to say thank you. My father talks about you all the time, about the vault and the journal and what you're doing with Great-Uncle Edmund's legacy." Her voice broke. He never had much family growing up, never knew where he came from, but now he does, because of you. Marcus didn't know what to say. "I'm just trying to honor what Edmund wanted." "You're doing more than that. You're healing wounds that are generations old. You're giving us a history to be proud of." She paused. "I'm an art historian. I specialize in American collections from the Gilded Age, and I was wondering, would there be a place for me at the Foundation? I want to help. I want to be part of what you're building." Marcus thought of Edmund Hartwell, alone in his frozen manor, dreaming of a family he would never have. And now, 50 years after his death, his family was coming home. "There's always a place," Marcus said. "Welcome to the Hartwell House of Second Chances." Sarah Hartwell arrived in Vermont the following month and threw herself into the work with a passion that reminded Marcus of himself in those early days. She catalogued pieces that Dorothy hadn't had time to research. She wrote detailed histories of each acquisition. She designed new exhibits that told the full story of the Hartwell family, not just Edmund, but the generations before him, the sources of the fortune, the complicated legacy of wealth in America. She also became a mentor to Lily, teaching her about art history over hot chocolate in the Manor's kitchen, showing her how to look at a painting and see not just beauty, but story. "Every brushstroke is a choice," Sarah told her one afternoon. "Every color, every composition. The artist is trying to tell you something. Your job is to listen." Lily took this to heart. She started carrying a sketchbook everywhere, drawing the things she saw, the visitors, the volunteers, the treasures in the vault. Her drawings weren't technically perfect, but they were full of life and warmth and the same gift for connection that had defined her mother. Marcus watched his daughter grow, and he saw Anna in her every day. The way she laughed, the way she made strangers feel welcome, the way she believed, with unshakable faith, that the world was basically good and that people were basically kind. He had worried in those dark days after Anna's death that Lily would grow up scarred by loss, that she would learn to expect abandonment and disappointment, that she would build walls around her heart the way Marcus had, the way Edmund had. But that hadn't happened. If anything, Lily had become more open, more loving, more trusting. She had watched her father take a broken-down manor and transform it into something beautiful. She had seen strangers become friends, skeptics become supporters, enemies become irrelevant. She had learned that the opposite of fear wasn't courage, it was love. On the 5th anniversary of the foundation's opening, Marcus stood before a crowd of over 1,000 people gathered on the manor's grounds. Lily sat in the front row, now 12 years old, her dark curls longer, her eyes the same deep brown as her mother's. Dorothy was there, and Sarah and Edmund III, and Robert Ashworth, and dozens of others who had helped build what Marcus could never have built alone. 5 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, I was a widowed carpenter with an empty bank account and a broken heart. I bought this house for $1,200 because I needed a place for my daughter to feel safe. I had no idea what was waiting in the basement. Soft laughter rippled through the audience. When I found Edmund Hartwell's collection, the paintings, the gold, the cars, all of it, my first thought was that I had won some kind of lottery, that all my problems were solved, that money would fix everything. He paused, looking out at the faces before him. But money doesn't fix anything. Not really. It can buy comfort, security, opportunity. But it can't buy love. It can't buy meaning. It can't buy the feeling you get when you help someone who's struggling, or teach a skill to someone who needs it, or watch a child discover something beautiful for the first time. His eyes found Lily's. She smiled at him, and his heart swelled. Edmund Hartwell spent his whole life collecting treasures. He had more wealth than most people can imagine, but he died alone, in an empty house, surrounded by beauty he couldn't enjoy. And in his final journal entry, he wrote something that changed my life. Marcus pulled the worn leather book from his pocket. He had carried it for 5 years now. He knew the words by heart, but he read them anyway, wanting the crowd to hear them in Edmund's voice. Do not do what I did. Do not let these treasures become another prison. Use what I have left to build something beautiful, something alive, something warm, something that can love you back. Marcus closed the journal. That's what we've tried to do here. Not just preserve a collection, but create a community. Not just display wealth, but share it. Not just honor one man's legacy, but build a new one together. He looked around at the manor, at the galleries, at the people who had come from across the world to be part of this moment. The Hartwell House of Second Chances isn't about me. It's about all of us. Every volunteer who gave their time, every donor who gave their money, every visitor who walked through these doors and left feeling a little less alone. Every family we've helped through our programs. Every child who learned that the best treasures are the ones you share. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. 5 years ago, I thought I had nothing. No family, no future, no reason to hope. But I was wrong. I had Lily. I had the memory of Anna. And I had the chance to do something that mattered. He looked at his daughter one more time. That's all any of us have, really. The people we love, the memories we carry, and the chance to make a difference while we're here. He stepped back from the podium. The applause started slowly, then built to a thunder that shook the windows of the old manor. Lily ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. Dorothy was crying. Sarah was crying. Even Robert Ashworth, who had probably never cried in his 87 years, was dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. Marcus held his daughter and let the sound wash over him. He thought of Anna, watching from somewhere beyond. He thought of Edmund, finally at peace. He thought of all the lives that had been touched by this impossible journey. And he thought of his father, his brothers, the family that had abandoned him when he needed them most. He didn't hate them anymore. He wasn't sure he ever really had. He just felt distance. They had made their choices. He had made his. Their paths had diverged, and there was no going back. But there was going forward. There was always going forward. That night, after the crowds had gone and the caterers had cleaned up and Lily had fallen asleep on the couch in the library, Marcus walked through the manor alone. He traced the same path he had walked 5 years ago, when this place was frozen and dark and full of secrets. Now it was alive, warm, full of light. He descended the stone stairs to the vault one more time. The cars gleamed under their protective covers. The paintings hung on climate-controlled walls. The gold sat in its reinforced cases, worth a fortune, but no longer the point. Marcus pulled out Edmund's journal and added one final entry. His own handwriting this time, below the old man's faded words. You asked me to build something alive, something warm, something that could love me back. I hope I have. I hope you can see what we've made. I hope you know that your loneliness wasn't wasted. It led to this. It led to connection, community, hope. It led to a daughter who believes in kindness and a town that believes in second chances. You were never truly alone, Edmund. You were just waiting for someone to find you, waiting for someone to understand. I found you. I understand, and I will carry your story forward for as long as I live. Thank you for trusting me with your treasures. Thank you for teaching me what they really mean. Your friend, Marcus Webb. He closed the journal and placed it back in the desk drawer, alongside the pocket watch Edmund III had given him all those years ago. Then he climbed the stairs, turned off the lights, and went to carry his sleeping daughter to bed. Outside, the stars burned bright over Holbrook, Vermont. The manor stood silent against the sky, its windows glowing softly, its doors closed but never locked. And somewhere in the frozen earth below, the treasures waited. Not for a collector, not for a buyer, not for an heir. For the next person who needed to believe that broken things could be made whole, that lonely hearts could find connection, that second chances were always possible, no matter how far you had fallen or how long you had been alone. Anyone can rebuild from nothing if they are brave enough to start and kind enough to share what they find along the way. As the first light of dawn crept over the hills of Holbrook, Marcus Webb stood at the window of the room that had once been Edmund Hartwell's study. Lily was still asleep, curled beneath a quilt Anna had made years ago, her breathing soft and peaceful. The manor hummed with the quiet of early morning, but it wasn't the heavy silence of abandonment anymore. It was the silence of rest, of a home that had worked hard and earned its peace. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here, the grief that had nearly destroyed him, the family that had turned away, the desperate gamble on a frozen house no one wanted, the treasures buried beneath stone and ice and decades of loneliness. He thought about Edmund Hartwell, a man he had never met but had come to know more intimately than most of the living. He thought about Anna, whose love still guided him even though she was gone. He thought about Lily, growing up surrounded by beauty and purpose, and the unshakable belief that kindness was the greatest treasure of all. And he thought about all the people yet to come, the visitors who would walk these halls and feel something stir in their hearts, the families who would receive scholarships and grants and second chances of their own, the children who would learn trades in the workshop and carry those skills into lives Marcus would never see. He wasn't just a widowed father anymore. He wasn't just a carpenter. He wasn't just the man who found a fortune buried in a basement. He was a builder, a teacher, a guardian of legacy and hope. The Hartwell House of Second Chances wasn't just a museum or a foundation. It was proof that the worst moments of your life could become the foundation for the best. That loss didn't have to be the end of the story. That even the loneliest soul could leave something beautiful behind if someone was willing to find it and share it with the world. Marcus placed his hand on the cold glass of the window and watched the sun rise over the hills. "Thank you," he whispered. To Anna, to Edmund, to whoever or whatever had guided him to this place. Then he turned away from the window, walked down the hall, and gently woke his daughter for another day of building something that would outlast them both. Because that was what life was, really. Not the treasures you accumulated, not the money in your accounts, not the possessions you left behind. It was the love you gave, the lives you touched, the hope you planted in hearts that needed it most. Marcus Webb had learned that lesson the hard way. And now, standing in the house that had once been a prison and was now a beacon, he knew he would spend the rest of his life teaching it to anyone willing to listen. The man who had been abandoned by his family had built a family of his own. The father who had lost everything had found more than he ever dreamed possible. And the frozen manor that everyone said was worthless had become the most valuable place in the world. Not because of what was buried beneath it, but because of what was built on top. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories of hope, heart, and second chances. Click to stay with us and discover what happens when ordinary people find extraordinary purpose. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that everyone deserves a second chance.